The tension in the studio was subtle at first, the kind that didn't announce itself with raised voices or dramatic gestures, but instead crept in quietly, hiding behind smiles and polite nods. Oprah Winfrey sat tall at the table, her posture relaxed yet deliberate, hands folded loosely as she listened. The familiar warmth she was known for was present, but there was something restrained about it, as though she were measuring every breath. Across from her, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, one arm resting on the table, eyes alert and thoughtful. To the casual viewer, it looked like another high-profile conversation between two legends. To those paying closer attention, it felt like a slow-building storm. The discussion had started innocently enough: legacy, influence, the responsibility of public figures in an era of endless opinions. Oprah spoke about intention, about the importance of lifting people up, about using platforms to heal rather than divide. The audience nodded along, some murmuring approval. Whoopi agreed at first, adding her own perspective, her tone calm but grounded, stressing that influence also meant accountability, even when it was uncomfortable. The exchange was respectful, almost reverent, like two veterans acknowledging each other's battles. Then the conversation shifted. Whoopi posed a question that landed differently. She spoke about power, how it changes people, how even the most well-meaning voices can become insulated by admiration. Her words weren't accusatory, but they carried an edge. Oprah responded with grace, explaining that growth often comes from listening and evolving, not clinging to authority. She smiled as she spoke, but it was a controlled smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. The audience sensed the change, leaning forward as if collectively holding its breath. Whoopi pressed again, this time more directly. She spoke about moments when influence overshadows dialogue, when conversations become declarations rather than exchanges. Her gaze stayed fixed on Oprah, not hostile, but unflinching. Oprah nodded slowly, then replied, her voice still smooth but firmer now. She spoke about boundaries, about how leadership also means knowing when your voice is being misinterpreted. Each sentence was measured, each word carefully chosen, yet the undercurrent was undeniable. The hosts around the table shifted in their seats. One tried to interject with a light comment, hoping to soften the mood, but it fell flat, dissolving into the thick air between the two women. Oprah leaned slightly forward, her hands now resting separately on the table, fingers spread. She spoke about respect, not as a buzzword, but as a lived principle. She said conversations should challenge ideas, not diminish the person behind them. The studio grew quieter, the kind of quiet that makes even the smallest sound feel amplified. Whoopi responded without raising her voice. She clarified that challenge wasn't disrespect, that honest dialogue required friction. Her tone was steady, but there was steel beneath it. She spoke from experience, from decades of navigating spaces where silence was often expected. Oprah listened, her jaw tightening just slightly. When she spoke again, there was no smile this time. Her words came slower, heavier, as she explained that there was a difference between friction and dismissal, between dialogue and being talked over. That was the moment the tension crystallized. Oprah paused mid-sentence, as if realizing something she hadn't intended to say aloud. She looked around the table, then out toward the audience, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. The studio lights reflected softly in her eyes, which now held a seriousness that cut through the room. She said, calmly but unmistakably, that she had come to the show expecting a conversation rooted in mutual respect, not one where her intentions were questioned in a way that felt personal rather than productive. A hush fell over the set. Whoopi opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, clearly weighing her words. Oprah continued, her voice low but unwavering. She spoke about knowing when to step back, about refusing to participate in moments that felt more like confrontation than conversation. Each word landed with precision, and the audience sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or the breaking point of something deeper. Then Oprah stood. The movement was unhurried, almost ceremonial. She adjusted her jacket, smoothed the fabric as if grounding herself, and took a breath that was visible even from a distance. For a split second, it seemed like she might sit back down, that this was simply a dramatic pause. Instead, she offered a brief, composed glance toward Whoopi, neither angry nor apologetic, but resolute. Without raising her voice or adding another explanation, she stepped away from the table. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras hesitated, then scrambled to follow her as she walked toward the edge of the stage. The applause that instinctively tried to form never quite materialized, swallowed by shock and confusion. Oprah didn't look back. Her heels echoed softly against the studio floor, each step deliberate, each one signaling that this was not a moment of impulse, but of decision. As she disappeared off stage, the set remained suspended in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present. The conversation, the laughter, the carefully planned segments, all of it evaporated, replaced by a single, unspoken question hanging in the air. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted the instant Oprah passed through the curtains. What had moments earlier been a carefully choreographed television set now felt like the aftermath of an unexpected storm. Producers exchanged alarmed looks, headsets crackling with overlapping voices trying to decide what to do next. A stage manager hurried after Oprah, calling her name softly, but she raised a hand without turning around, a quiet signal that she needed space. Her expression was composed, but the intensity in her eyes suggested the weight of years, not minutes, had driven her decision. On set, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Whoopi remained seated, her hands folded, her face unreadable. The other hosts glanced between her and the empty chair Oprah had left behind, unsure whether to speak or wait. Finally, Whoopi exhaled and broke the quiet with a measured remark about strong voices sometimes colliding when the stakes are high. Her words were calm, reflective, but they couldn't quite fill the void Oprah's absence had created. The audience responded with tentative applause, more out of instinct than conviction. Within seconds of the show cutting to commercial, phones backstage lit up. Publicists, network executives, and assistants all scrambled as clips of the moment began circulating online. Someone replayed the footage on a monitor, watching Oprah stand, watching her walk away, as if seeing it again might somehow change what had happened. It didn't. Each replay only reinforced the gravity of the moment. Oprah sat in her dressing room, alone now, the door closed behind her. She sank into a chair, shoulders finally relaxing, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. There was no anger on her face, just a deep, contemplative stillness. She knew how moments like this lived forever in the public eye. She also knew that staying would have meant compromising something she had spent a lifetime protecting, her sense of self-respect. When a producer gently knocked, she thanked them for understanding and quietly declined to return to the stage. Meanwhile, Whoopi stood backstage, arms crossed, listening as a producer explained the plan to wrap the show early. She nodded, absorbing it all, then asked simply whether Oprah was okay. The question surprised a few people in the room. It wasn't defensive or sharp, it was genuine. Whatever had happened on air, Whoopi understood the weight of the exchange. She had never shied away from difficult conversations, but this one had clearly cut deeper than intended. By the time the episode ended, social media had erupted. Clips of Oprah's exit dominated feeds, dissected frame by frame. Some viewers applauded her for setting boundaries, praising her calm strength and refusal to engage in what they perceived as disrespect. Others argued that Whoopi had only done what talk shows were meant to do, ask hard questions and challenge powerful figures. The debate grew louder by the minute, pulling in commentators, celebrities, and fans who felt personally invested in both women. News outlets rushed to publish headlines within the hour. Analysts speculated about long-simmering tensions, about clashing philosophies, about whether this moment signaled a deeper rift or was simply an intense misunderstanding amplified by live television. Old interviews resurfaced. Past collaborations were re-examined. Every word either woman had ever said about dialogue, power, or respect was suddenly fair game. Behind the scenes, the network issued a brief statement emphasizing respect for all voices and acknowledging the emotional nature of live discussions. It satisfied no one completely. Viewers wanted clarity, accountability, meaning. Silence, however, remained the dominant response from both Oprah and Whoopi as the night wore on. Later that evening, Whoopi sat alone in her office, scrolling through the reactions. She paused on a clip of Oprah's face just before she stood up, the moment of decision, unmistakable even in stillness. Whoopi leaned back, rubbing her temples, reflecting on the fine line between challenge and confrontation. She had built her career on honesty, on saying what others wouldn't. Yet she couldn't ignore the possibility that something in her words had landed differently than she'd intended. Oprah, miles away, watched nothing. She turned off her phone, poured a cup of tea, and stared out a window as the city lights flickered below. Her thoughts weren't on headlines or trending topics, but on the importance of modeling boundaries, especially for those who looked to her as an example. Walking away hadn't been about winning or losing. It had been about choosing peace over performance. The following day, the conversation only intensified. Morning shows debated the moment. Experts weighed in on communication, respect, and the pressures placed on women in the public eye to remain composed no matter the provocation. Some called it a cultural reckoning, others dismissed it as media theatrics. Yet beneath the noise, a quieter realization emerged. Viewers had witnessed something raw and unscripted, a reminder that even icons are human. Days later, a subtle shift occurred. Whoopi addressed the moment on air, speaking thoughtfully about the power of dialogue and the responsibility that comes with it. She acknowledged that words carry weight, especially between peers who command immense respect. It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening. Shortly after, Oprah released a brief message of her own, expressing appreciation for honest conversations while reaffirming her commitment to environments rooted in mutual respect. The public response softened, the outrage dulled into reflection. What remained was the image of two towering figures, each standing firm in her truth, colliding not out of malice, but conviction. The moment became less about a walk-off and more about what it revealed: how strength can look like leaving, how courage can exist on both sides of a clash, and how even in disagreement, dignity can still lead the story. Long after the clip stopped trending, that day lingered in collective memory. Not as a scandal, but as a reminder that real conversations are messy, that boundaries matter, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is made not with words, but with the decision to stand up and walk away.